Welcome back to Domains and Dimensions of Behavior Analysis and Applied Behavior Analysis in Early Childhood. This is video part 4. We're beginning with objective 7, list and identify some characteristics of ABA practice and some subdomains of ABA. So we've covered the first two major domains so far, EAB and ABA research. Now we're on to ABA practice, also known as ABA service delivery. And within ABA practice, we're going to talk about some subdomains of ABA. So a primary goal of ABA practice or service delivery is to help the client or the student meet their goals and ultimate outcomes in ways that result in a lasting, meaningful improvement in the quality of their life. So we want to use interventions that very quickly help the learner or client change their behavior or acquire new skills related to intermediate behavioral goals. Intermediate behavioral goals are designed to establish a repertoire that subsequently would enable the learner to meet some ultimate outcome. And the ultimate outcome is some large, meaningful improvement of the quality of our life that's lasting and that generalizes. Okay, so we want to produce behavior change and teach skills that maintain over time, even as aspects or components of the intervention are reduced or eliminated, or the entire intervention is eliminated. We want to produce behavior change and new skills that generalize to untrained stimuli or settings or contexts or people. We want our interventions to have, very often want our interventions to have generalized effects across untreated behaviors. So sometimes it's advantageous for the student or learner for if the effects of the intervention spread beyond the initial or the primary target behavior. Now, ABA practice is not ABA research, which should be apparent now. And so ABA practice is accountable, public, doable, empowering, and optimistic. And ABA research is all of those things too. The primary difference between ABA practice and ABA research is that ABA research is focused on answering a research question, extending prior knowledge, ultimately contributing to a more complete science of behavior. But ABA practice, the focus is on helping a client or student meet their goal or ultimate outcome. Right? But ABA practice and ABA research share these characteristics of accountability. They're public, they're doable, empowering, optimistic. Now here are some subdomains of ABA. First one is organizational behavior management, or also known as OBM, which is the management and supervision of employees by applying basic principles of behavior. Then you have instructional technology, which involves instructional design and instructional delivery. So instructional design can involve development of curricula used in general education or special education, K through 12 or in higher ed. And then instructional technology also includes instructional delivery, so a focus not on what's being taught but how to teach it. Behavioral gerontology, so that's applied behavior analysis in elderly populations. And then behavioral health. Okay, so some important journals are Behavior Analysis in Practice and The Behavior Analyst. So those are some journals that are particularly important for ABA practitioners, ABA service delivery professionals. But ABA practitioners and service delivery professionals should be contacting the scientific literature in all journals that publish behavior analysis research, including JAD and JABA. Most professional organizations major professional organizations are the first one here, Association for Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI. So that's the professional organization in behavior analysis. That's the largest organization. Then we have also the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts, or the APBA. There's also the Texas Association for Behavior Analysis. That's our local chapter of ABAI. There's also the Behavior Analysts Certification Board, or the BACB, of course, which I haven't listed here, but I talk about elsewhere in the course, so I don't have it listed here. But the BACB, of course, is a major professional organization. And then we have COEBO. That's a new professional organization, Code of Ethics for Behavioral Organizations. That's what COEBO stands for. ABA research and ABA practice have a reciprocal relationship. Right? So I said EAB and ABA research have a reciprocal relationship. Well, there's a reciprocal relationship between ABA research and ABA practice as well. Each one identifies questions for the other to investigate further, with the ultimate goal of improving and expanding applied behavioral technology. So ABA researchers are validating behavior change procedures and assessments, seeing how they work, if they work, and then disseminating them to practitioners. And so ABA practitioners or service delivery professionals use validated behavior change procedures and assessments, and then sometimes they publish their clinical data in scientific journals, and that can inform ABA research. Also, ABA practitioners, service delivery professionals tend to have colleagues who work in ABA research, and they have conversations that it may inform research based on practice. Practitioners go to conferences and interact with researchers that way. That's another way that issues that come up in ABA practice or service delivery can inform the direction of ABA research. And that relationship's very important for promoting ABA research that has practical application, in that addresses current issues and trends in ABA practice. Okay, so I want to give you just a brief example here of ABA practice or service delivery in a home setting. I could have given you an example in any setting, but my experience is largely in home settings, so that's an example I can provide here. I served a client many years ago who was a 4 or 5 year old boy with autism, a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, but who also had whose mother abused or used drugs of abuse while she was pregnant with him, and also he had cerebral palsy. So he had an autism spectrum diagnosis, cerebral palsy, and a prenatal history of drug abuse by his mother. And I'll tell you briefly about cerebral palsy. It's a type of movement disorder. The disorder is permanent and appears in early childhood. People with CP can show somewhat different symptoms, which may include poor coordination, muscle stiffness, muscle weakness, tremors. They might also have deficits in sensation, vision, hearing, swallowing, speaking. The development of rolling over, sitting, crawling, or walking don't occur normally, as in children without CP. And children with CP may also demonstrate seizures, problems with reasoning or thinking, and and symptoms worsen typically during the first few years of life, but then tend not to worsen over time across the lifespan. And this little boy was on my caseload, and I was a supervisor working for an ABA agency that provided behavioral intervention to children with autism, and I managed a team of line therapists. So as a supervisor, I would work with the family and conduct assessments and develop the child's goals, and then develop the program and determine what needed to be done to help the child meet their goals. And then I train the line therapist, and the line therapist or behavioral tutor or technician, whichever job title you want to give them, they are the one that actually implements the intervention. And then the supervisor periodically, let's say on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, attends sessions, observes the therapist working with the child, and then makes adjustments to the program and so on and so forth. And so in this case, this little boy engaged in severe challenging behavior that in the past had been resistant to treatment. And I don't know why I put here that he likes garbage trucks just to remind me of this client, but there's no significance there. The garbage trucks are just that he happened to love going outside and seeing the garbage trucks come by and pick up the trash. But anyways, so yeah, he engaged in severe challenging behavior, such as aggression towards others and self-injurious behavior that had been resistant to treatment in the past. But no one had conducted an experimental analysis called a functional analysis to determine what was maintaining challenging behavior. Was it attention? Was it tangible? Or did it serve an escape function or an avoidance function? And I felt that the behavior actually served a different function. It didn't fit into any of those categories. But I didn't initially. I didn't just come up with that. I was reading some scientific literature in ABA research on functional analysis, and I learned about a new type of functional analysis conducted by researchers in the special education department at the University of Texas at Austin, something called an interrupt FA. And what the researchers did is they showed a variation of functional analysis methodology, this type of assessment, and they showed a variation of it that was able to demonstrate that children engaged in challenging behavior, not all children, but the children in the study, because in the past it was effective at terminating interruptions of activities. In other words, children with autism were engaging in ongoing activities, and then when they were interrupted, they would engage in challenging behavior. So interruption of the activity would evoke challenging behavior, and then they would engage in challenging behavior until the interruption was terminated and they were permitted to resume the activity. Right? So the function of the challenging behavior was to discontinue activity interruption and resume an activity they were previously engaged in before the interruption. So I thought that was interesting, and the characteristics of the participants really corresponded closely to my client. So I studied the methods, and I wrote up a protocol, and I initially provide some initial training to my clinical team member, the line therapist that was working with my client. And with assistance from his mother, we conducted a modified version of the Interrupt FA for him. And lo and behold, we found that his challenging behavior was just like the participants in the study. It was reinforced by being able to return to an activity that was interrupted. So we were then able to use those data to develop a far more effective intervention. We were able to develop a functional communication training treatment package that focused on teaching alternative ways to mend for the termination of activity interruptions instead of engaging in aggression towards us or self-injurious behavior. So that's an example. Therefore, there was a clinical case and a clinical problem that I myself and others had been unable to solve, and so I went to the scientific literature and found, well, what have researchers done in similar cases? Oh, they did this thing called an interrupt FA. Okay, well, that seems to the procedures and the clients seem to correspond well. The procedures and the participants seem to correspond well to my client. So I tried it out, and it worked. It was helpful. It was effective. It enabled us to improve the interventions that we were using. But notice that I used largely the same procedures with my client that were described in the study that I had referenced. So I'm using basically the same procedures that ABA researchers were using, but not to answer a research question in my client, but to help improve my client's behavior, help them meet a goal. And so that's an example of ABA service delivery or ABA practice. Okay, next ASR here. To help the client or student meet their goals and ultimate outcomes in a way that result in lasting, meaningful improvements in quality of life is a primary goal of A, ABA research, B, EAB, C, radical behaviorism, or D, ABA service delivery. Give me a couple more seconds. Try to close the poll. Answer here is ABA service delivery. What is the major difference between ABA research and ABA practice? Is it A, ABA research targets socially significant behavior? B, the purpose of ABA practice is to help the client? C, the purpose of ABA research is to help the client? Or D, ABA practice validates behavior change procedures and assessments? A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is B. The purpose of ABA practice is to help the client. Next ASR, what is the major difference between ABA research and EAB? Is it A, EAB is concerned with fundamental principles of behavior? B, EAB targets socially insignificant behavior? C, EAB uses repeated measures of behavior? Or D, Skinner was the father of ABA research? A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The answer here is B. EAB targets socially insignificant behavior, so arbitrary responses. Now, if you were tempted to choose A, now that would be incorrect because EAB is focused on identifying and characterizing fundamental principles of behavior, but ABA research is certainly concerned with fundamental principles of behavior, and so they're not different in that way. But ABA research is much more focused on application of those fundamental principles of behavior as well. Okay, so ABA research involves not just applied behavioral technology, but also the science of behavior. ABA research is also not just our technology, but also part of our science. Okay. Okay. I think that wraps up this video part, and then I'll see you in the next video part, beginning with objective